Hello everybody, we are at the Warrior exhibit in Lincoln County, Tennessee. I'm Don Counts and we have Linda Williams with us. Linda, tell us who we have.
Don. Today we have Mike Keenan to interview with us, and we're excited to hear what he has to say.
Thank you.
Mike, tell us a little bit about your life, where you're from, and
Okay.
what got you in the military.
I'll do the best I can.
All right.
I originally am from Corpus Christi, Texas. That's where I was born and raised. My dad was a Navy World War II on a ship, and when he got out after World War II, they moved around. Originally, they were from Ohio, and they moved around. Finally, ended up in Corpus Christi, where I was born. My dad worked at a RADMAC, which was CCAD there. So I was been around the Navy, which is funny. I was around the Navy for a good part of my life, and around that environment. And my dad worked on helicopters, and was a machinist working on helicopters at CCAD. And I went to college and decided I was going to join the Army. I'd go to flight school, and ended up flying helicopters and flying some of the same types of helicopters that my dad worked on. So we had some interesting conversations. He was very much the technical level of understanding, and I was the stick wiggler type pilot that I learned my craft, and learned about the functionings of the aircraft, but nowhere to the level of his capabilities. So I joined in 1991. I'm what they call it. A kind of derogatory term, they call high school flight school type person. I didn't serve as an enlisted before I became a pilot in the Army. I went to basic, to warrant officer candidate school, and then to flight school, back to back. So I think it was more challenging with all the classmates that I had going through walk school and flight school, because I still had to learn the Army too. So it was a little more challenging. So it took me several years to figure out the Army. But the flying part was the easy part. My first assignment out of flight school was Fort Hood. I was a medevac pilot. So I flew Hueys in a medevac unit, 507th. Best mission in the Army, as far as pilots go, as far as I'm concerned. Enjoyed, loved it. You've had a sense of accomplishment. We did a lot of things that were called mass missions at the time. It was well before there were a lot of civilian medevac operations going on. So we were doing a lot of civilian crash recovery, crash rescues, flood recoveries, things like that. A lot of that in the Fort Hood, Fort Sam, San Antonio area, and all the way up through Dallas and areas like that. So did that, about 4 years of that, and wife and I, we started having children, and at that point I realized a lot of car crashes and accidents you go to, you start recovering a lot and picking up small children, and at certain times I found myself trying to break the helicopter, trying to get to the hospital as fast as I could, so I realized it was time to take a break from flying medevac. So I still keep in touch with a lot of those folks that I flew with way back then. Great job, great. And I never went back to medevac, but I kind of wish I did. I went from there. I went to Vicenza, Italy. I was flying a much different mission. I was flying VIP, general support, still flying Hueys, but flying different cargo. A lot of generals and folks like that. I flew. At one time, we had a total of 10 stars in one aircraft. And I was flying with a young lieutenant, and I reminded him as we were taking off, I said, if you make a mistake, this is probably the highest rank you're ever going to make. So, but everything came out fine. From there in Italy, did 2.5 years in Italy. I turned the last UH-1 Huey out of Italy and turned that into Mannheim, Germany, and they were deactivating that unit. And then I had assessed for the 160th Special Operations in Fort Campbell. Prior to that, I had been to the instrument examiner course. I was an instructor pilot. I went to the instrument examiner course, and I also went to the Black Hawk course, mandatory aircraft advancement. So all the Hueys were being retired. So anybody that was in the utility helicopter got pushed into flying Black Hawk. So I went to the Black Hawk course. So my assessment to go to the 160th, I was assuming that I was going to fly Black Hawks, or that if I got picked up in assessment, that I would be flying Black Hawks. And when I got there and assessed, and I opened up my file, and it said MH-47s. So I was like, okay. I asked, I said, did you make a mistake? And they said, nope, we want you to fly Chinooks. They said, okay, good. Which was great because my dad helped design the engine transmit, or the transmission test stand that connected all the transmissions that they still use down in Corpus Christi. So, so I became a 47 special operations pilot. Did a few years as a line special ops pilot, flying 47 Echoes, and we went to Korea. And I kind of made a decision, and this was pre 9/11. I made the decision that I wanted to be a maintenance test pilot because I enjoyed the finding out what's wrong, the taking it from broke, determining what the problem was with it, fixing it, and getting it back into service. I enjoyed that piece of it, the challenge of it. So I went. Then 9/11 happened. While we were in Korea. We moved our unit to the Philippines, and we lost one of our airframes, and I lost 10 good friends in a crash in the water there, which was pretty devastating. I'd flown the night before in that same aircraft in the same environment, and it was one of those times in my life that I thought this is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. And it was there were two examples, and both of them were over water, and both of them were at night under NVGs and terrible weather, that I thought, man, you can have these flight wings because this is stupid. But losing his friends, it still hurts at times. Then like I said, we were in the Philippines. We were going after, I don't know if everybody remembers the Burnhams, the missionaries that were being held hostage down there. We were in search of them, and we were also going after the Abu Sayyaf, which was the terrorist organization there in the Philippines. Great flying, great time, great bunch of people I worked with. I think I was in there for 5 or 6 months in the Philippines. I left there, returned back to Korea, short enough time to basically out-process and turn around, and then go back to where I was at, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So I spent about 16 years at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, all combined. When I returned back from the Philippines, Korea, went to the maintenance test pilot course, and from there on, it was a MH-47 maintenance test pilot. Fantastic job. Loved the whole thing, working with the guys. The maintenance piece of it is it's kind of still I'm kind of still involved in that now. Trying to think what else. I know I kind of rambled on.
Explain what you did as a test pilot.
As a maintenance test pilot, any kind of maintenance action that's taken on an aircraft, the work gets done, the work gets inspected, and somebody has to go out and do a functional check flight. That's a civilian term. Maintenance test flight is the military term. To go out and do an evaluation of if the flight controls were repaired, if an engine was replaced, a transmission was replaced, or there was troubleshooting that had to be done because somebody reported the aircraft wasn't doing what it was supposed to, and you go out and evaluate it. I've evaluated. Sometimes it was borderline experimental test flights because a lot of times some of the things we were testing and trying to figure out what was wrong, there was nothing in writing on what it was doing. We would basically evaluate it as best we could and go piece by piece until we found out what the problem was with it.
But you were actually in the air. You weren't in some booth somewhere.
No, in the air. Oh yeah.
That would scare me. Test pilots kind of scare
Well,
me.
and they don't like the experimental pilots are the ones that do the experimenting. They don't like us being called test pilots. We're maintenance test pilots, and they will remind everybody of that. But there are many times that I've done a lot of troubleshooting on things that we didn't know what was wrong with it, and it was doing very strange things. So I did. A lot of people ask how many times I deployed. We, in the special ops community, our up tempo, our operational tempo was so high that we started out, a standard conventional rotation was somewhere around 12 to 15 months. But it was like they'd take the whole unit and move into, yes, their op tempo was high, but they had downtime and things like that. Our op tempo was extremely high. We were flying every night. The line pilots, the mission pilots that were out doing the real dirty work were in the cockpit probably 8 to 12 hours a night, and so it's nonstop. So we got to the point where our deployments were shorter. So we would go over, started out 120 days or so. It got to the point where we were doing rotations down to the 30 to 60 day and rotating crews over constantly. So we were rotating fresh aircraft and we were rotating fresh crews because the op tempo was so high that people were starting to get just exhausted and worn down. So the number of deployments, the number of times I rolled back and forth in theater to between Iraq, Afghanistan, other places, a lot.
When you say crew, how many people would be on a crew for a mission?
Depending on the mission, most cases, 2 pilots, obviously. A lot of times a mission commander may be in the aircraft and usually 4 crew members in the back. Again, depending on what the mission was. When I was on my test flights, normally most of our missions and everything, the 160th was all flown most primarily at night. All the test flights took place during the day for most part. So a lot of times I would be out flying and it would be me, another pilot, and 1 crew member in the back, a flight engineer. And that was usually it.
Okay, I don't know anything about helicopters except they have the thing on top. But how many people would a helicopter carry?
It depends on how big the people are.
Marty.
I've seen the aircraft in different locations, smaller people. I've seen it jam-packed with as many people as we call it cubing out before you wait out, because it's just you run out of space. There's so many variables associated. How far I have to go, how much gas I have to carry, how high I have to go, how hot it is. So there's a lot of variables to how many people I can carry.
An average number.
You can get 30 to 40 in there pretty easily.
Wow.
How are the helicopters? Were they good machines?
Oh yeah, great, fantastic. Chinook's the best aircraft out there, and I remind everybody that flies other aircraft that. Because I work in a maintenance facility and we don't have any Chinooks currently in work, but I have a lot of Blackhawks, and I have 2 Blackhawk pilots that work for me, and I keep reminding them that it's still not a Chinook.
Tell us what you do today.
Well, today I am the Director of Aviation Operations for ULISTA in Meridianville, Alabama. So I run the maintenance facility, I should say. I have great people, and which makes it really easy for me. I hired a couple incredible pilots. One of them I actually worked with in the Army. That when I found out that he was retiring, I went up and talked to him, and I said, and he actually lives here in Fayetteville, which I'll connect you to him. He was going to go work for EMS, do an EMS job, do a airlift job, and I sat down with him for coffee, and I said, let's have a talk. And he's I wanted him because I knew his work ethic. So that was important to me to understand. I wanted a test pilot because we'd had a test pilot that didn't get down in the weeds and get dirty with the guys and work on it and troubleshoot. And then the two guys that I have are exactly that. They know their business.
What's the difference in the helicopters that you started with compared to the helicopters of today?
UH-1, first aircraft I flew, and again I flew that through to the 96, from 91 to middle of 96. You had to fly it. It was very mechanical. You had to have your hands on the flight controls. You could make it dance. It was a great aircraft. It was forgiving, a forgiving aircraft, but you still had to fly it and you had to give it your attention. The aircraft today are much more obviously modern. The flight control capability, you can put one at a hover and take your hands off the flight controls. You can pretty much fly an entire flight in the aircraft today without touching the flight controls, managing through the flight management system. So it's definitely different. There's a whole lot of more mission management and those kinds of things that are going on versus when I first started flying.
Let's talk about the military. How was the military when you first started, and how is it when you left?
It changed a little bit. The benefit is again, I spent 16 years in the special ops community, so we were kind of isolated a little bit outside of some of the socio type issues. My son is in the military right now. He's a PV3, soon to pin on E4, I think. He's infantry, so but he's big strong kid, and he as long as he wants to stay with it, he'll go far.
It's got to make you proud.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You got something?
Yes. Your job now obviously relates to what you were doing in the service,
Mm-hmm.
but how did what you did in the service carry over into your future careers?
Oh, there's no way I could be doing what I'm doing without what I had learned in the military, and especially that last 16 years. Yeah, there's no way. I wouldn't have the leadership as far as being able to manage the diversity in the workforce, the number of people. Right now I have right at 173 people in my facility. So being able to put people on task, trust them to do what they're supposed to do, not micromanage. Probably the difference between now and then, I retired as a CW5, and I was my nickname was Grumpy. So that, if that tells you anything, it was true. And I had a rather aggressive spirit. So when I said something, I meant it, and usually, and I didn't have there was no pushback. It got done. Now, I'm not as grumpy, and I've learned to approach things a little bit differently, more tactfully, and that's what tactful is one of the. And when you do the assessment, and they do the psychological piece of the psychological evaluation to make sure you're not whatever. One of the under the multiple hundreds and hundreds of repeat questions that are worded differently, trying to catch you in a loop or something. They one of the things is ask you, well, what is your strongest suit, and what is your weakest? And I put tact on both of them. Because I believe that being direct and telling somebody exactly how it is a strength. It's a weakness. It's a weakness with some people because they can't take it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes, I agree with you.
so dealing with, everything that I learned as far as in the military and managing the deployments, because a lot of times I would take my team and we would take aircraft whenever we would deploy. We would take aircraft over, torn down. They'd load them up in the back of a C-17, Air Force C-17 cargo plane. We'd load them up, fly over, build them back up, test fly them, put them back into service, and we had the timeline to do that, usually because they want it tomorrow. So when that, you have to push your workforce. You have to understand the strengths of certain people and the weaknesses of certain people, and you have to be there and monitor them. You can't give them a task and walk away and come back a few hours later. You have to be there working with them, because once they start getting tired, they start making mistakes. People make mistakes. So we had fighter management that we would. It even applied to the maintainers, because you're building an aircraft. It doesn't, crew management, crew rest has always been applied to pilots and crew. Well, I thought that applies to maintainers and the people putting their aircraft together, because you don't want them exhausted to the point where they're making mistakes. It puts your life in danger. So we would deploy. A lot of times we'd spend 16 hours plus building up aircraft, multiple aircraft at the same time sometimes. But with that, I was always there and made sure that I trained the guys that I had trained, because I became a test pilot trainer, maintenance examiner, and I was one of the senior test pilots. So I was training the new guys that you have to be there with your guys. You can't go do something else, go watch TV, go take a nap. You need to be up there with them, and you need to make sure, listening for wrenches falling, listening for mistakes, listening for a little extra cussing and things that's going on, and a little frustration with, animosity between people and things going on. So you want to be there to make sure at the point, sometime you're going to have to say, okay, let's shut it down. Let's go get 4 hours of sleep and get back at it, here later. So it's a little bit different managing people now. But hourly employees are a different challenge than managing Army soldiers. You can work an Army soldier to, they don't get paid by the hour.
True.
How many flight hours you have?
I quit counting. I quit. I quit counting, because I'm well over 2,000. But I never, when I realized that I probably didn't want to fly when I got out, that I really just kind of quit counting. I'm over 2,000 easily, but.
Mike is also a member of the board of Friends of Fayettville Lincoln County Veterans, and we're very fortunate that he serves on that, and he also serves on the Veterans Service Committee,
Mm-hmm.
the Lincoln County Veterans Service Committee. So he is definitely involved.
And I hang out with Don with the Rotary whenever I can get there.
Yeah, once you do. Tell us a little bit about your nonprofit that you're involved with.
All right. I am on the board. I'm vice president of Horsepower Therapy, which it's a veterans nonprofit organization for, basically gearheads, motorheads, those types of people, veterans, first responders, family members that are of veterans that are into cars. We start, and the origin of it is the origin of horsepower therapy comes from deployments. That's why my best friend, Brian Russell, who is actually the first guy that hired me out of the military when he was a government employee at Redstone. So I was getting out. I started working in a crew station working group for him, working on the 47 side. And what it started as is that he was a FMQ, full mission qualified pilot in one of our companies, and he was also into the systems integration side. But when he would deploy, he was a car guy. He would deploy, him and another guy, Greg Coker, who just wrote a book not too long ago. When they came back from their deployments, their therapy for coming back home was working on the cars. So he kind of turned that into building cars and going out to SEMA in Las Vegas, where he'd have cars built. So we kind of put it together that, well, if it's helping him and others like him and us, that, well, maybe we turn this into something else. So it went from a kind of a for-profit, if you will, building cars, getting cars out there, to doing it for nonprofits, getting people out to events, getting them out, talking. So, and a perfect example of that is we were at Camaro Fest up in Bowling Green several years back, and an individual walked up, and it was very hot, and everybody, it was just unusually hot, Bowling Green, Kentucky, August. So we were set up, we had our tent set up, and a young man walks up. He's got his baby in his arm, and his wife is next to him, and he has a scar on his head. And he's just walking around, seemed to be really kind of standoffish and looking at cars and things like that. And he picked up one of the brochures and started, looking through it, talking about what we do, and started talking to him and explained to him what we did. We got, communicating with veterans, getting veterans to open up, veterans that, we have all these different organizations that you get people of like mind. They seem to communicate better and they open up with each other a little bit better. So started explaining that to him, and he took his daughter, handed his daughter off to his wife, and pulled out his phone and started going through pictures and showed when he was hit, his vehicle was struck by an IED. And basically his head was basically canoed open. It looked pretty bad. So he's showing all the pictures and explaining that, he's got an old car in the garage that he says, when I get to the point where I can't handle this, he says, I go out in the garage and what we like to call, I bust a knuckle. I work on the car. And so those are the types of people that we're after, that trying to communicate with, get them out thinking, communicating, talking to people under the guise of a common bond. We do every third Saturday down at Stove House in Huntsville. We do a cars and coffee. So a lot of crew, basically people come in, pull up, open their hoods, start talking cars, have a cup of coffee, and in a couple hours everybody leaves. We're doing that. We're actually getting ready to, we're going up in October to Old Forester for bourbon, and we're buying a barrel, and we're going to donate for donations the bottles. It'll be Horsepower Therapy label on it. So we're going to be doing that. So that'll help. Everything goes in. It's 100%. Every bit of money that gets donated and we put in, comes in. It all goes to getting people to events and things like that. We took veterans to SEMA in November last year. We were going to do Camaro Fest this last year, and glad we didn't because the weather hit up there and tore everything up. We go to Colorado, go to Bandimere Raceway. We go all over. We have one of our board members is in Texas. We have guys that are in Kentucky. We have guys that are all over that are supporting and getting people out and doing things, just getting out.
If somebody's watching, how would they get more information about that program?
Horsepowertherapy.org.
Very good.
Very
That's
good,
something.
yes.
Anything else? Well, we appreciate it, Mike.
Thank you.
Appreciate you talking to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.